note 3, about a $1,000 in funding from MB for a Welcoming Communities program, and talking about as part of the refugee settlement program, and thinking that we haven't had any refugees settle here yet. Is that money in the bank ready for when we do, or is it being used for something else? What's happening with that?
Through you, Chair. So part of the program requires council to employ a coordinator, and that is one of the largest components of the funding that's received. Just to be clear, while a significant component of the program is about the settling of the refugees, it is not only specific to that. Welcoming Communities is quite broad in terms of its scope, and it requires us to do a range of things outside of just the specific refugee component. So the coordinator, that employment recruitment process has been undertaken, and a person has been appointed. And they will be coming in to both set up the program but also work in with our partners to do some of the other broader scope to the program. I will circulate out to councillors because I think it is useful for you to have an understanding of that scope in response to your request as well.
Any other questions? I've got one on page 38. The emergency works on Gladstone Road. We won't refer to the typo later in the document. Did we actually get NZTA subsidy on that under emergency works provision?
Yes, we did.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just make a note, through you, Chair. I did make a typo in the report where I mentioned Poes Road rather than Gladstone Road, so apologies for that.
Page 41.
I did have a question through you, Chair. In terms of the National Land Transport changes that we're not expecting as much money as we had anticipated, wondering how that will impact budgets and capital expenditure in particular over the next year.
Sure. So where there is some potential funding impacts in the case of cycling, for example, we still do have, so we assumed, I believe it's 61% in terms of an NZTA or Waka Kotahi funding portion. So there is still, from a borrowings perspective, we had still assumed that we would need to borrow the 29% that's our local share. So that's still available. And as well, I guess, in terms of the overall capital program, depending on what happens in specific projects that are happening over this year, with slowdowns with COVID, for example, with other things in terms of timing, it's very likely that we may look to come to you with some proposals to shift programs around. I know we've talked about year 1, 2, and 3 being a bit of a program where we may need to shift projects around depending on funding. So there may either be some timing changes or some level changes in terms of the volume of CapEx that might happen in the cycling space, for example, or potentially some reprioritization. Hopefully that answers.
Thank you. Any other questions? So if we go back to page, no, not 27, it's page 43. We've got not too far ahead, sorry, getting ahead of myself. Sorry, I was looking on the screen and we've done the previous item, thank you. Page 31, we have a, thank you, Member Brian, do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Sam. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Our next item is on page 43, our monitoring of our internal recommendations. Take the report as read. Are there any questions, comments? I understand the procurement policy will actually be coming back to Council, I assume, this committee in due course. Okay, any questions on this? I don't see any questions. Can I have then a mover for the recommendation on page 43? Have you got a question or are you moving? Oh, moving, thank you, Councillor Sam. Seconded, Councillor Christine. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Our next item is the work programme. Another jump. Yes, no, work programme on page 49. Any questions? This is mainly for your information and it will be progressively updated. Oh, Member Jackson.
You keep promoting me.
I know I do.
Listening to the debate, Chairman, on the three waters, I think we need either October or November to spend a reasonable amount of time on our risk register and just have a look at how those risks, I mean, if you can see without, as Councillor Allen said, the review of local government, but if you just look at the three waters, they pose an enormous risk for us, both financially and democratically in every other way. So I really think we need to, and I know everyone's under pressure and we've got staff shortages, so if it's November it's fine, but I think if we can spend some good time on that, it would be useful.
I totally concur, and actually if you look at the work programme, there is actually a risk report in October, and I'm going to have discussions with the officer regarding what that report looks like. What I would like Council to debate as part of that report is what is its top between 5 and 10 risks, and one of them is actually not the three water reform, believe it or not. It's actually the reform of local government. And I actually see the RMA reform is actually bigger than the three water reform. So, I think that would be useful. I actually see in total the reform of local government, which includes the review, the RMA and the three waters, that combined is a significant risk for council that needs to be understood, and what are the risks. And it might be, we just don't know, but then it's a watching brief, and how do we actually monitor those risks as they change through the process. Councillor Jennings?
Yes, Mr. Chair. One thing that is relevant to this discussion is that last week we had a presentation by Councillor Mark in terms of the process that they've just been through. It was quite a good discussion around risk, and so I'm just wondering how we can take the learnings and some of the suggestions and feedback that came through that process and perhaps input that into the design of the report or whatever we're going to do in terms of the risk space, because it might just be that we can sort of kill a couple of birds with one stone, so to speak. Yeah.
And I think, thank you, Chair. I took from the Council Mark feedback the understanding of what could blindside us as a council, and I think we need to have that lens over the risk conversation.
Through you, Chair, just to inform members that I'm having a meeting with Ashley tomorrow in terms of how we can add things to the work programme, including that risk assessment from Council Mark and other things that came out of that. So if any members do have some items that they want to be considered for the work programme, can they please let me know as soon as possible? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, one item that I just noted in November, you'll see on there's rates review stage 1 affordability. That may actually move to be a briefing, just because we agreed that we might have a bit of a workshopy briefing before. It's more about giving ideas and explaining to you where we're at before it gets to that workshop stage in the public. So it's definitely as we talked about, we'd have a few briefings first, throw ideas around, and then it would get to a public workshop stage. So that may alter a little bit in terms of what you see in the future programme.
But you can update that at the November meeting. So that's the whole idea. It's a revolving, refining, so it actually informs us of what's coming, but also helps staff develop those reports. so they don't get blindsided. All right, so any further discussion? Can I have a mover for then the recommendation on page 49? I think Councillor Victoria got it just before you. You'll second it, Councillor Ross. All those in favour, please say aye. As against, carried. Our last item on the agenda is the Farm Committee actions on page 53. Do not believe it requires any discussion. However, is there anything that can come off? Just the Treasury report can come off. Thank you. You're happy to move, Councillor Sam. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Todd. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. As against, carried. With no further business, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you for your spirited bidding.